Imagine waking up one morning, walking outside to enjoy the view from your peaceful lake cabin, and finding a letter nailed to your door. It's from the HOA. They are demanding that you leave the property. Not politely, not with a conversation. Just a cold, legal-sounding notice telling you to vacate from a place you've owned and loved for years. At first, you think it must be a mistake. You've paid your taxes. Your bills are in order. You've lived here quietly, never caused any trouble. The cabin's been in your name for a long time. It's your retreat, the kind of place where time slows down. The lake glistens in the morning sun. Birds chirp in the trees, and the dock out front gently rocks with the waves. This is home, even if it's just a weekend getaway. But as you read the notice again, your heart sinks. It's not a mistake, at least not according to them. The HOA claims you've been using land you don't own. They say the boat dock, the one you've repaired, used, and maintained for years, belongs to the community. And now, they're saying your cabin extends into land that isn't yours. You're accused of trespassing. They even threaten fines. Legal action. Eviction. You feel stunned. A little numb. Maybe even a bit scared. You start to question yourself. Could they be right? Could you really have been using land that doesn't belong to you? That's when the worry sets in. Because if they're right, if you really are in the wrong, what happens next? Do you have to tear down your dock? Move out of your cabin? Fight a long and expensive legal battle? But something doesn't sit right. Deep down, you know this place is yours. You've walked the boundary lines before. You've seen the property map. You've paid for every inch of it. Why would they come after you now? You go inside and dig through your old files. Deeds, surveys, property tax receipts. You start to feel like a detective, piecing together a puzzle that shouldn't exist in the first place. You call the county office. You pull public records. Hours go by. Days, even. And with every document you find, the picture becomes clearer. Not only do you own the land your cabin sits on, but the legal description of your property goes even further than you remembered. And then comes a twist you didn't expect. That boat dock, the one they claimed was theirs, the one they wanted to take back, it's legally on your land. The dock is yours, not theirs. In fact, the HOA's own map, the one they've been using to manage community rules, is outdated and wrong. And it doesn't stop there. Turns out, your property line doesn't just touch the edge of the lake. It runs underneath the HOA prize dock and stretches farther than anyone thought. What they've been treating as shared community property is, by law, your private lot. No easements. No shared rights. Just clean, simple ownership. Now you're not just defending your right to stay. You're holding the legal title to a piece of land the HOA has been using, maybe for years, without permission. And suddenly, the power shifts. You're no longer the one under threat. They are. Because now, they've got to explain why they've been managing part of your property like it belongs to them. Why they tried to kick you out of your own land. And why they sent that eviction notice in the first place, when you were the rightful owner all along. It's one of those moments where everything flips. What started as fear and doubt begins to turn into something else. Resolve, confidence, maybe even a little bit of satisfaction. You weren't wrong. They were. But now you have to decide what to do with this information. Keep quiet, press charges, negotiate, and while the legal part isn't over yet, something has definitely changed. Because now, you're not just a cabin owner on a quiet lake. You're the legal owner of land that others tried to take, including the very dock they thought they controlled. And the story doesn't end here. It started with a knock on the door, or rather, the absence of one. There was no conversation, no warning, no neighborly chat. Just a printed notice, stuck firmly to the front door of the cabin. You don't recognize the person who delivered it. No uniform, no introduction. Just a logo from the Homeowners Association, and a bunch of legal words you had to read twice just to believe. The letter was cold. It didn't sound like it came from a group that represents a community. It sounded like it came from a law firm. Terms like unauthorized use, trespassing, and immediate compliance jumped off the page. You were given 14 days to respond or face legal action. According to them, your entire setup, including the cabin and the dock, was encroaching on community land. The letter was clear. Move out, or they'd make you move. You sit down with a notice in your hands, still unsure if this is a prank, a mistake, or something more serious. You try calling the HOA office. Voicemail. You send an email. No reply. Days go by. Nothing. It starts to feel deliberate, like they are stonewalling you, like they are waiting for you to panic. But this isn't just some rental. This is your land. Your name is on the deed. You've invested in it, cared for it, and paid for every upgrade. You've never had issues before, no complaints, no disputes. So why now? Why this sudden move to push you out? You start asking around, talking to neighbors. Some have heard whispers, rumors about the HOA wanting to reclaim land near the lake for future development. Maybe a shared recreation area. Maybe more docks. But no one knows anything for sure. It's all speculation. What you do know is that your dock, the one you repaired after last year's storm, the one you fish from every summer, is now being labeled a community asset. According to the notice, you've been monopolizing shared resources. It doesn't make sense. You built the dock. You paid for the materials. You even paid the permit fees years ago. So how is it suddenly a shared resource? You check the HOA handbook. No mention of docks. No rules about cabin boundaries near the lake. Nothing that justifies what they're claiming. But that's when it hits you. Maybe they are hoping you don't check. Maybe they assume most people won't push back. At this point, you realize this is more than just a misunderstanding. It feels like a power move, an effort to pressure you into giving something up, maybe even to clear the space for something else. There's no real conversation, no compromise, just an aggressive demand for you to vacate what's been yours all along. So you begin to retrace everything, starting with the original property boundaries. You go through old documents, title reports, and maps. You even reach out to the surveyor who handled the land when you first bought the cabin. He remembers it. He pulls up the files. And that's when the story starts to shift. The surveyor sends you a scanned copy of the original plat map, and there it is, in black and white. The property line doesn't just hug the cabin walls. It extends beyond them. It includes a patch of land that slopes down to the water, and it includes a boat dock, the one they claim is theirs. According to this, it was always part of your parcel, the same one the county taxed you on, the same one listed in your deed. You even call the county recorder's office to double-check. A friendly clerk confirms it. The lot number, the coordinates, the acreage, all match your deed. Everything the HOA said about common land doesn't appear anywhere in the official county records. You begin to feel something shift inside. Not anger exactly, but something close. The notice that once made your stomach drop now just makes you shake your head. They were wrong. Not just a little wrong. Completely wrong. And they didn't even bother to check the records before sending that letter. But it's not over yet. Now that you know the truth, the question becomes, what will they say when you show them the facts? What happens when the HOA realizes they've been trying to evict the legal owner, not just of the cabin, but of the very dock they've been claiming for years? Something tells you they are not going to take it well. You couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, so you kept digging. You weren't just going to let a group of board members tell you to leave your own land without a fight. If the HOA thought you were just going to roll over and give up your lake cabin, they had no idea who they were dealing with. You pulled every file you had, every closing document from the purchase, every survey, every boundary map. It was all there, buried in papers you hadn't looked at in years. But this time, you looked at them differently. Every line, every legal description, every set of coordinates mattered now. You noticed something on the original property survey, a line that extended farther than the fence behind your cabin. It went beyond the tree line, right down to the edge of the water. It wasn't a guess. It was a clearly marked boundary, and that boundary didn't stop at the dock. It went right under it. That was your first clue. You decided it was time to confirm everything. So you hired a licensed surveyor, not just to double-check, but to officially mark the property lines according to the county records. Within a few days, the results came back, and they confirmed everything you suspected. The land surrounding the cabin, including the path to the lake and the dock itself, was 100% within your property line. You weren't encroaching on HOA land. They were the ones crossing into yours. The most surprising part? The dock the HOA had been claiming as their own, the one they insisted was a shared structure, wasn't even close to their property. Not an inch of it. It was entirely within your boundary. Built legally. Permitted. Recorded. Maintained by you. For years. But that wasn't all. When you compared the current HOA map with the official county records, the differences were shocking. The HOA's map had outdated property lines. Their layout still followed old, incorrect plats that had never been updated. They'd been operating under a false assumption for years that the land by the water belonged to the community. But it didn't. It belonged to you. You brought the new survey and deed to a local real estate attorney. He looked at the documents for a while, then smiled and said, "You've got nothing to worry about. If anything, they're the ones trespassing." He explained how common this kind of thing is. HOAs that overstep their authority, relying on old maps or misunderstanding property rights, especially in lakeside communities where boundaries can be confusing. You couldn't believe it. All that stress, all the emails, the notice, the threats, all based on a mistake they could have avoided by checking public records. And yet they went ahead and tried to push you out. Bold, but careless. The next step was to pull the original plat of the entire neighborhood. You found out your lot was one of the few that was privately deeded before the HOA was even formed. That meant the HOA had no legal control over your property. You weren't part of their jurisdiction. They couldn't fine you. They couldn't tell you to move. And they definitely couldn't claim your dock. Turns out, when the neighborhood was built, a few parcels were sold directly to private owners before the HOA bylaws were created. Your lot was one of them, which meant you were never legally bound by their rules to begin with. You had never signed anything. You'd never agreed to be a member. No dues, no obligations. And yet, here they were, acting like they owned the whole shoreline. You couldn't help but wonder how many other property owners around the lake were in the same situation. How many had been pushed around by the HOA simply because they didn't know any better? How many had given up land they actually owned, just to avoid conflict? Now you had the proof, the papers, the legal backing. You knew exactly where your rights began and where the HOAs ended. The only thing left to do was decide how to use that information, because whether they liked it or not, the dock they wanted back never belonged to them in the first place. Armed with a survey and all the legal documents in your hands, you decide it's time to confront the HOA. You're no longer the confused cabin owner receiving threatening letters. Now, you're the one with facts, evidence, and a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're right. But how will they react? You send an official letter to the HOA board. It's clear, polite, but firm. You include copies of the property deed, the recent survey results, and the county's property records. You explain that their claims about the dock and surrounding land are incorrect. You highlight the boundary lines that show your ownership extends past cabin and includes a dock. You ask for a meeting to discuss the matter face-to-face. Days pass without a reply. You start to wonder if they even received your letter. Then, unexpectedly, you get a response, but it's not what you hoped for. The HOA president sends an email denying your claims outright. According to them, the surveyor's report is flawed, and the HOA's maps are the official documents. They say you're mistaken about the ownership, and that their eviction notice stands. You feel frustration rising. They are not willing to admit they made a mistake. It's almost as if they are doubling down on their position, hoping you'll back down. But you're not going anywhere. You decide to request a formal meeting with the board during the next HOA session. The day of the meeting arrives. You prepare yourself, knowing this won't be easy. You bring printed copies of every document again. You take notes, ready to explain your side clearly and calmly. You know they can't argue with the official deeds and the surveyor's maps. The facts are on your side. At the meeting, you listen as a board members start by outlining their concerns. They talk about community standards and shared use of the lakeside property. They insist the dock is a communal resource meant for all residents. You nod politely but wait for your turn. When you speak, you calmly explain how the survey clearly shows the dock is within your property boundaries. You point out that the county record confirm your ownership. You remind them that the HOA's own documents outdated and incorrect. You emphasize you want to find a peaceful resolution, but you can't accept an eviction based on false claims. Some board members exchange looks. You can tell they are surprised by your knowledge and preparation. One older member admits quietly, "We didn't realize the boundaries were this clear. This changes things." But then another member pushes back. "Even if you own the land, you're part of this community. You agreed to the HOA's rules when you bought here." You shake your head. You never signed any agreement. You explain that your lot was privately deeded before the HOA formation, so their authority doesn't extend to your property. The room grows tense. The conversation shifts to legal terms, property rights, and HOA bylaws. You keep your cool, focusing on the facts and not getting drawn into emotions. You've been pushed to the edge, but now you hold the cards. After a long discussion, the board agrees to temporarily withdraw the eviction notice. They say they need time to review the documents and consult legal counsel. You nod, relieved but cautious. You know the fight isn't over, but this is a step in the right direction. As you leave the meeting, you feel a mix of exhaustion and determination. You realize how important it is to stand your ground when it comes to property rights. The experience taught you the value of preparation, persistence, and patience. Outside, you glance back at your cabin in the dock. They still belong to you. You're ready for whatever comes next, because now you know exactly where you stand. After the meeting, things didn't just settle down quietly as you might have hoped. Instead, the situation took on a life of its own. The HOA began to consult their lawyers, sending you letters filled with legal jargon that only made your head spin. They claimed they were still investigating, but their tone shifted. It became clear they were preparing for a bigger fight. You realized this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding anymore. It had turned into a full-on legal battle. You started to feel the weight of it all. Legal fees, time away from work, stress creeping into your days and nights. But at the same time, you felt something else growing stronger: determination. You weren't going to let a group of people bully you out of your own property, especially when you had the law and facts on your side. This was your home, your investment, and your sanctuary. You reached out to a lawyer who specialized in property disputes, someone who understood HOA conflicts well. After reviewing all your documents and the HOA's claims, they assured you that your case was strong. The ownership was clear, and the HOA's attempt to claim your land didn't hold up in court. It was a relief to hear that. But they also warned you that legal battles could drag on for months, maybe even years. Patience and resilience would be your greatest allies. With your lawyer's advice, you began gathering more evidence: old photographs showing the dock through the years, receipts for maintenance and repairs, letters from neighbors confirming your long-standing ownership. Every piece added another layer to your defense. You even started documenting everything the HOA said and did, preparing for whatever might come next. Despite the tension, you tried to stay focused on what really mattered: your connection to the land. Every morning you woke up and looked out at the lake, the sun reflecting off the water, the gentle sway of the dock beneath your feet. It reminded you why you fought so hard. This place wasn't just property. It was a part of who you were. Neighbors who once stayed quiet began to approach you, sharing their own experiences or offering support. Some had seen similar disputes with the HOA. Others just admired your courage to stand up. Their encouragement gave you strength. It wasn't just your fight anymore. It was a symbol of standing up for what's right in a community that sometimes felt more like a battleground. Throughout the process, you learned so much about the legal system and property rights. You discovered how important it is to know your deed inside and out, to question assumptions, and to never let anyone push you around without proof. You saw how easy it is for misunderstandings to spiral out of control if people don't communicate openly or check the facts carefully. There were moments when frustration almost overwhelmed you, when you wondered if it was worth the battle, when the uncertainty felt unbearable. But each time, you reminded yourself of the peaceful mornings on the lake, the quiet moments on your dock, and the future you were protecting. You also realized how important it was to stay calm and composed. You avoided heated arguments and personal attacks, focusing instead on clear communication and facts. That helped keep the situation from escalating further and showed the HOA you were serious but reasonable. As the weeks turned into months, negotiations slowly began. The HOA's lawyer finally agreed to a meeting with your attorney. The tone was more respectful now, and the focus shifted from eviction to resolution. Both sides started discussing compromises and legal agreements that would respect your ownership but also address any concerns the community had. You weren't just fighting to keep your property. You were also trying to rebuild trust and find a way forward that everyone could accept. It was challenging, but it felt necessary, because no matter how difficult the process, you believed that a peaceful resolution was possible if everyone respected the facts and each other's rights. In the meantime, you continued living your life as normally as you could. Fishing trips, quiet evenings by the fire, watching the seasons change around the lake. That connection to the land and water gave you a sense of calm amidst the chaos. It reminded you why you were fighting, not out of anger or stubbornness, but out of love for your home. The experience also changed how you saw community. You realized that owning property isn't just about deeds and boundaries. It's about relationships, trust, and standing up for what you believe is right. It showed you the importance of being informed, proactive, and willing to speak up when something feels wrong. Looking back, the whole ordeal was overwhelming, exhausting, and at times discouraging. But it also made you stronger, wiser, and more confident. You learned to navigate legal systems, stand your ground, and protect what matters most to you. And even though the legal fight wasn't over yet, you knew one thing for sure: no letter, no eviction notice, no mistaken claim could take away your right to your lake cabin and the dock you owned. That knowledge gave you peace and power, more than any piece of paper ever could. The months that followed were a whirlwind of phone calls, emails, and meetings. You thought the hardest part was behind you when the HOA finally acknowledged your ownership, but it soon became clear this was just the beginning of a much longer journey. Legal battles have a way of dragging on, testing your patience and resolving ways you never expected. One afternoon, as you were working through another pile of paperwork, your lawyer called with an update. The HOA's attorneys had come back with a counteroffer, a proposal that seemed designed to keep you tied up in negotiation for months. They wanted shared access rights to the dock, restrictions on how you could use your own property, and, surprisingly, some kind of fee for what they called community maintenance. You read the email twice, hardly believing what you were seeing. You owned the land, yet they wanted to dictate how you could enjoy it and even charge you for it. It was maddening. But you reminded yourself that you'd come too far to let frustration cloud your judgment. Instead, you sat down and drafted a clear, firm response. You laid out the facts again, the deeds, the surveys, the legal precedents, and explained why a proposal was unacceptable. You weren't opposed to working with neighbors or supporting the community, but not at the cost of your rights or peace of mind. Days later, a small group of neighbors approached you privately. They admitted some felt caught in the middle, unsure who was right but wanting the dispute to end peacefully. They shared stories of their own experiences with the HOA, some positive, some frustrating. Their openness surprised you. It was clear this conflict had stirred feelings beyond just property lines. It had touched on trust, communication, and a desire for fairness in a tight-knit community. With their encouragement, you began reaching out to others in the neighborhood. You hosted informal gatherings at the cabin, nothing official, just coffee and conversation. You wanted to hear their concerns, share your side, and start rebuilding relationships. The discussions weren't always easy. Some residents were skeptical or even resentful about the whole situation. But slowly, barriers started to come down. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the lake, a longtime resident confided in you. They said they'd always believed the dock was community property because that's what they were told as a kid. But now, after seeing the documents and hearing your story, they realized things weren't as simple as they seemed. They thanked you for standing up and for being willing to listen. Those moments of connection reminded you why this fight mattered beyond legal ownership. It was about respect for property, for neighbors, and for the truth. You weren't just defending a dock or a lot. You were helping to heal a community that had been divided by assumptions and misunderstandings. Meanwhile, the HOA continued to send letters and proposals. Some days, the back and forth felt endless. You learned to pick your battles, choosing when to respond and when to let silence be your answer. You worked closely with your lawyer to ensure every move was strategic, protecting your interests without escalating conflict unnecessarily. At the same time, you took time for yourself. You went fishing on calm mornings, walked along the shore, and spent quiet evenings watching stars appear one by one. Those moments grounded you, reminding you of what was at stake, not just the land, but your peace of mind and connection to this special place. As spring arrived, new opportunities opened up. The HOA, sensing the tide was turning, proposed a formal meeting to discuss long-term agreements about the lakeshore. This time, the atmosphere was different. The conversations were more constructive, focused on finding solutions that respected both individual ownership and community interests. You listened carefully as ideas were shared, from granting neighbors limited access rights to the dock, to creating a joint maintenance fund with clear boundaries, to updating community maps with accurate property lines. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. For the first time, it felt like a true negotiation, not a power struggle. You also made it clear that any agreement had to be voluntary, transparent, and legally sound. You weren't interested in vague promises or backdoor deals. Everyone deserved clarity and respect. Through these discussions, you realized how important communication had been missing all along. If the HOA had reached out earlier, shared accurate information, and involved you in decisions, this conflict might never have escalated. It became clear that many disputes like this come down to misunderstandings and a lack of transparency. You started thinking about ways to prevent future conflicts, maybe hosting regular neighborhood meetings, creating a shared information hub, or encouraging open dialogue among residents. The experience had taught you that owning property isn't just about deeds and surveys. It's about building trust and community. And while the path ahead still held challenges, you felt ready. You had learned to stand firm without losing your cool, to listen without giving up your rights, and to fight for your home with patience and grace. The lake cabin and the dock were more than just land and wood. They were symbols of your resilience and your commitment to fairness. In the end, this journey wasn't just about keeping your property. It was about carving out a place where you belonged, not just legally, but as a valued member of a community learning to heal and grow. Just when you thought the hardest part was behind you, life threw another curveball your way. The HOA, after months of tense negotiations and slow progress, decided to take the matter to court. You received the official notice one crisp morning, the kind of letter that sends a chill down your spine even though you know you're prepared. Suddenly, this was no longer just about conversations and compromises. It was a full legal showdown. Your heart raced as you read through the documents. The HOA's lawsuit claimed you had violated community rules, restricted access to neighbors, and damaged common property. Their demands were clear. Either you remove the dock, pay hefty fines, or face eviction. It was the most aggressive move they'd made yet. But deep down, you knew you had the evidence and legal counsel to defend yourself. You met with your lawyer, laying out a game plan. The lawyer explained that property law is complicated, especially when it involves HOAs, but your ownership was solid. The key would be proving your rights in court, showing that the HOA's claims were baseless. You spent days preparing your case, reviewing documents, gathering witness statements from neighbors, and lining up expert testimony about the land surveys. As the court date approached, the stress was intense. You found yourself waking up at odd hours, replaying scenarios in your head. What if the judge misunderstood the facts? What if the HOA's lawyer found some loophole? The uncertainty weighed heavily, but you pushed those thoughts aside. You focused on what you could control, knowing your evidence was strong, staying calm, and trusting your lawyer. On the morning of the hearing, you arrived early, your stomach tight with nerves. The courtroom was quiet except for the murmurs of other cases in progress. When your name was called, you stood, heart pounding but voice steady. The judge listened as both sides presented their arguments, the HOA insisting they had the right to enforce community rules, and you standing firm on your deeded ownership and legal boundaries. Your lawyer presented the survey maps and historical documents, explaining clearly how your property included the dock and surrounding area. Witnesses spoke about the long-standing use and maintenance you had carried out, confirming that the dock had always been yours. The HOA's arguments, while passionate, lacked the solid evidence you had painstakingly gathered. As the hearing went on, you noticed the judge's attentive expressions. They asked questions that showed they were carefully considering the facts, not just the HOA's claims. It felt like a turning point, that justice was being served, even if it took time. Back at home that evening, you let yourself breathe for the first time in weeks. The cabin felt peaceful again, the gentle lap of water against the dock like a quiet reassurance. No matter the outcome, you had fought hard and stood up for what was right. The wait for the judge's decision was agonizing. Days stretched into weeks, each one filled with anticipation and occasional doubt. But then, finally, the ruling came. The court sided with you, affirming your ownership of the entire lot and the dock. The HOA's eviction notice was declared invalid and their claims rejected. It was a victory beyond words, not just for the property, but for your sense of justice and perseverance. The relief washed over you like a wave. You could finally breathe easy again. But even with the legal battle behind you, you knew the story wasn't quite over. The HOA would have to update their records and adjust their rules, and relationships in the community needed healing. You felt a responsibility to help that process, to turn conflict into understanding. You started reaching out more, sharing your experience, and encouraging neighbors to learn about their own property rights. You became a quiet advocate for transparency and communication in the neighborhood. The dock, once a source of tension, became a symbol of resilience and standing up for what's right. You thought back to the beginning, the initial threats, the letters, the confusion. It all seemed like a distant memory now. What had started as a fight to keep a dock had grown into a journey of learning, growth, and community building. And every time you step out onto that dock, looking over the calm lake, you're reminded not just of the water or the land beneath your feet, but of the strength it took to claim what was yours, and the peace that comes from knowing you never gave up.